Is it better for a leader to be loved or feared? Should a ruler prioritize moral purity or the stability of their state? These aren't just questions for a philosophy class. They are the dilemmas that have shaped history, and no one confronted them more directly than Niccolo Machiavelli. Often called the father of modern political science, and more notoriously, the father of realpolitik. Machiavelli's name has become a byword for cunning, manipulation, and a cold, hard look at power. But was he a teacher of evil? Or was he simply a man who dared to describe the world as it is, not as we wish it to be? Join us as we journey into the mind of one of history's most misunderstood thinkers. To truly understand Machiavelli, we have to look at the world he was reacting to. Before him, political philosophy was deeply intertwined with religion and morality. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle envisioned ideal states, governed by virtuous rulers who embodied justice and wisdom. The goal of politics was seen as achieving a moral good, a divinely sanctioned order. Machiavelli ripped this rulebook to shreds. He argued that this idealistic approach was naive and, worse, ineffective. He believed that politics had its own set of rules, separate from traditional morality. For him, the primary goal of a leader wasn't to be a saint, but to secure and maintain power. Because without power, a state descends into chaos, and no good can be accomplished at all. This focus on pragmatism, on the cold reality of human nature, was revolutionary. He was the first to truly separate politics from theology, laying the groundwork for a new, secular science of state. Machiavelli's cynical worldview wasn't born in an ivory tower. It was forged in the fiery crucible of Renaissance Florence. During the late 5th, 10th, and early 16th centuries, Italy was not a unified country but a patchwork of warring city-states, papal territories, and foreign interests, all vying for dominance. Florence, his home, was a republic caught in the middle of this constant turmoil. Machiavelli served the Florentine Republic for 14 years as a high-level diplomat and secretary. This job gave him a front-row seat to the brutal theater of power. He negotiated with kings, popes, and mercenary captains. He saw treaties made and broken in the same breath. He witnessed firsthand how quickly alliances could shift, how loyalty was a currency easily spent, and how violence and betrayal were common tools of state. He saw the powerful Medici family rise, fall, and then rise again, exiling him in the process. It was this direct experience with the instability and ruthlessness of politics that convinced him that idealistic principles were a luxury leaders could not afford. His lessons were learned not from ancient texts, but from the backrooms and battlefields of his time. It was during his exile, stripped of his position and desperate to return to public service, that Machiavelli wrote his most famous and infamous work, The Prince. This short book was a practical guide for a new ruler on how to acquire and hold on to power. Its advice was shocking for the time and remains so today. He argued that while it's good to be seen as merciful, faithful, and humane, a prince must be willing to act contrary to these virtues when necessity demands it. This is the origin of the phrase often attributed to him. The ends justify the means. He argued that if a leader's actions, even cruel ones, lead to the stability and security of the state, then they are justified. He also famously tackled the question of whether it is better to be loved or feared. His answer, ideally, both. But since it's difficult to have both, it is much safer to be feared than to be loved. Love, he reasoned, is held by a chain of obligation which, since men are wicked, is easily broken. But fear is held by a dread of punishment that never fails. A wise ruler, he advised, should inspire fear, but be careful to avoid hatred by not seizing the property or women of his subjects. He must be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. As you can imagine, The Prince was explosive. Immediately after its publication, Machiavelli's work was condemned by the church and placed on its index of prohibited books. His name, Machiavelli, became an adjective Machiavellian, a synonym for devious, cynical, and amoral politics. For centuries, he was seen as a diabolical figure, a whisperer of evil advice into the ears of tyrants. Shakespeare's villains often boast of their Machiavellian cunning. However, over time, a more nuanced understanding emerged. Thinkers began to see that Machiavelli wasn't necessarily advocating for cruelty and deception. He was describing them as essential tools in the grim reality of politics. He was the first to analyze power not through a moral lens, but as a dynamic, observable phenomenon. This objective, almost scientific approach is his true legacy. He single-handedly created the framework for what we now call realpolitik. Political philosophy, based on practical and material factors rather than on ethical or ideological considerations. Whether they admit it or not, every modern diplomat, politician, and political scientist stands on the shoulders of Niccolo Machiavelli. 500 years later, why do we still talk about him? Because the world, in many ways, hasn't changed all that much. His insights into power dynamics are timeless. Look at modern business. CEOs often make ruthless decisions, like laying off thousands of employees to ensure the company's long-term survival. Is that not a Machiavellian calculation? Prioritizing the health of the state, the corporation over the well-being of individuals. In international relations, nations form and break alliances based on self-interest, not friendship. They engage in espionage, propaganda, and sometimes military action to secure their position on the global stage. Leaders still grapple with the balance of projecting strength versus inspiring affection among their citizens and on the world stage. Machiavelli teaches us that power has a logic of its own, and ignoring that logic, no matter how noble our intentions, can lead to disaster. He forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the price of stability and the nature of leadership in an imperfect world. His work isn't a manual for tyrants, but a mirror held up to the face of power itself. Machiavelli's philosophy is a complex and often unsettling web of pragmatism, cynicism, and stark realism. But the ideas we've discussed today from the Prince are just the beginning. What about his other major work, Discourses on Livy, where he champions republican government and civic virtue? How does the Republican Machiavelli fit with the cynical advisor to Princess? We'll explore that paradox and uncover a different side of this fascinating thinker in our next episode. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the world of realpolitik interesting, make sure you subscribe and have notifications turned on so you don't miss part 2. See you then.